for joining me on the podcast again.
Hello, Sifu Mimi-chan. How are you?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, I was talking to you off air and I can't believe it's actually been this long since we've spoken, because I've spoken to Matt a ton and I feel like every time I speak to him, you're around and I feel very connected. So, but it's been a while.
Right. So you're part of the gang.
Greg's like almost weekly.
Greg's your co-host now, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Now he frequents the podcast, and of course, as he's gotten busier, we're not on as much. But through COVID, it was like every week, and I was just going to basically keep podcasting with him till he told me no more. So I wasn't going to let him stop.
That's great. Yeah, he's a delight. I texted him yesterday.
Yeah.
I think. He just popped into my mind while I was walking the dogs, and I was like, "Oh, how is my friend Greg?" I'm thinking of my friend Greg.
Probably walking Marlowe, and you're walking your dog.
Well be.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's such a pleasure. And it's been such a joy to follow and watch all of the work that you have been doing. And of course, last time I spoke to Matt, he did say, no, Kelly Sue, it's been crazy. She's been like going 24/7 and then some, if there were like bigger numbers to capture how crazy it's been for you. And then of course we see Historia and a lot of that, oh, that's what she's been up to, has been answered, but apparently there's so much going on.
That is the least of it, and
exactly,
unfortunately
you can't talk about it,
not until I think if we hook up again in late April.
Okay,
I can talk about what has been eating my life for the last year and a half, besides the pandemic. But
right.
It's wonderful, and I'm super excited about it. I believe the marketing schedule for it has an announcement in April, and then we can talk about it. And I guarantee it is nothing that anyone can guess. Like there's zero chance that this
wow yeah. That listeners are going to be like placing their bets now.
Yeah.
Challenge accepted. I mean, I'm not a great guesser, so I'm not even going to try. I'll just basically be following up with you in late April. I'm like, all right, Kelly Sue, you said we could talk about it. Let's do it. So, but as you mentioned, Greg and I talk all the time. And when Historia came out, and it was kind of one of those finally can talk about that one thing. Basically, we just gushed on air about how incredible you are, how incredible the comic is, and just the ingenious retelling of this Wonder Woman story. And Greg, I think Greg actually used jealous I didn't think of it.
He's very, I actually listened to that episode because I listened to I was listening to you and is it Jason
Chu just recently?
Yes.
Oh yeah, hip hop artist.
Last night, I think.
Okay.
Because I tear through podcasts.
Oh wow.
Like my, favorite thing. So
nice.
Anyway, so I enjoy you.
Oh man,
thank you for your service.
That's it. You made my week, or maybe even my month. Like Kelly Sue listens to my podcast, but
and I don't know
basically,
so I have to check it out.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's really cool, different stuff. So, but as you know, Greg and I were gushing, and your ears were ringing that day. Literally, you heard it. But gosh, it was just one of the things I saw, and congrats on all of the cool stuff surrounding it. I saw you on the TV show talking about it, and I caught a few interviews. And what I loved was that you said that this is the story that you wanted to read, and I'd love for you to have more time to expand on that, because I don't know if Wonder Woman was something you grew up reading, or or it's just the love of that character. But I'd love to kind of hear more about that journey and your thought process there.
Yeah. So. Probably, I think because of Wonder Woman, I have an incredible affection for it. In fact, I have a theater degree, which I'm certain I could draw a straight line from Wonder Woman comics to my studying theater and performing for so much of my life, because it started reading Wonder Woman comics, which introduced me to Greek mythology, which introduced me to Greek theater, which I read and used in school productions. I think it was 5th grade, might have been 4th grade. I did a sock puppet performance of Agamemnon.
Oh, wow.
That was like I mean, obviously not all of Agamemnon, but I did like a 10-minute
like a
thing
scene,
for
yeah.
I went to a DoD school in Germany, so we had small classes and a lot of like independent projects, and so I started reading classical theater very young, and then maintained that interest for the rest of my life. And then when the 2016 election happened, I had a hard time, as many of us did.
Yes, and we actually talked about that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm probably repeating a story.
No,
but
no.
I returned to. I realized I was kind of walking around in a haze for a few days, and I was like, I'm not very good. I don't have a good emotional vocabulary. I have difficulty identifying what I'm feeling. And Sifu, I've just made you my therapist as well. So
not at all.
So I said, like, this is grief. I'm grieving. And so then I was like, oh, okay, all right. And then I remembered a poster I had seen once of RFK that had a quote from Aeschylus. And I remembered that, when Robert Kennedy was grieving his brother, he turned to Aeschylus to guide him through his grief. And so I was like, well, that worked for him, it'll work for me. And so I kind of returned to reading classics at that point and revived a lot of my love for classical history and I should specify Western classical history. I'm not as well versed in Eastern classics at all. But that was kind of where that came from. And then so that love of, because the gods are so present in all of that kind of brings us back to Wonder Woman and the Amazons. And oddly enough, I quite like Wonder Woman, but I don't have a super visceral connection to the character, but I am very interested in the Amazons. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yes. I mean, and just coming through with the story, I feel like every person, I mean, every Amazon, every person on the page could have its own story and book. Yeah. And I'm just like, more, please. And, speaking about the history, since you have such an affection for it, and I know that it's just been one of those things, and I've just had the pleasure of talking to so many creators and kind of that extensive journey of how much research goes into this, where does this come from? Are you just pulling from different ideas? But there's also a difference between, having history in general and that lining up with actual historical things, and then like mythos, right? And so in terms of one of the things I also have heard you say was that you wanted the question of what version of history that we've always been fed, what we're kind of preconceived to know. And it's the origins of Wonder Woman, we got it, right? But then it's just kind of like exploding that and just going, but what if? Or this and right. And so,
Yes.
how extensive is that research? Do you kind of get like lost in that, or has it, because of ever since 2016, you revisiting all the classics? And I mean, is it like you have a notebook and you just like jot it down, and then right before you're like, oh, I have all these things kind of ready to go? Where does that all kind of tie together with the history and the research, and like, what that process is like for you?
Yeah. So I read a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the history, and then I'm looking. Oh, here we go. My desk is a disaster right now, but like there's a third Amazon book on my desk here somewhere. That's not it. But there's a history of the real women warriors of the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I this is kind of exciting to me. I got invited to do another podcast. It hasn't launched yet. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a thing where they're pairing up writers to be in conversation with one another. And it came in through my agent, and I was just like, I am so slammed right now. I really can't do it, but tell them if they can get me, if they can pair me up with Adrienne Mayer or Elizabeth Vandiver from she's a classics professor.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Buffalo, but I'm not 100% certain of that.
Yeah.
I think she used to teach at UT, but anyway, I was like, if they can get me to talk to Adrienne Mayer or Elizabeth Vandiver, then I'll do it. And I thought that would be.
Yeah, that you were trying to outsell you, over pitch yourself, like, oh yeah, sure, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, it's 10 grand to get me out of bed in the morning.
Exactly. And they're like, okay.
And then they were like, what a great idea that is. We'll try. And I was like, good luck. And then I heard back yesterday that they got Adrienne Mayer. And so I was like, oh, awesome.
And your wish is granted. Careful what you wish for.
Exactly.
But that's going to be phenomenal, right? Because and just kind of tying that all together, and what a great listen that is definitely going to be for definitely all of us. And yeah, I mean, there's just so much to dissect here in this book, and we definitely don't have to kind of go into all the details, but it's kind of ironic as since you do listen to the podcast, my podcast, and Spencer Ackerman has been kind of a frequent guest, and we did a book club together on Pamuk's My Name is Red, which is all about miniaturist art and all of these things. And of course, he's like a famous journalist in all the things that he does. But we got into this book together, and when Historia came out, he texts me the picture of the urns, because basically it's just like off the page of what like we had just absorbed ourselves into for a couple months of reading, and we were just like freaking out over it. And so that was really fascinating to us, and just kind of as a nod to our book club over there, but just that love of that art. And I'm sure Phil might have more to say about it, but I mean, clearly you had a very specific intent there with how you're going to portray that scene, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that kind of how that came to the page.
So I should three things. One is Ackerman sent me a lovely note after the book came out, which was just a very generous and kind thing for him to do. And then the question you were saying about all of the reading and research, I do quite a bit of reading and research. And in this case, there were sort of three things to research. There was the history of the mythology.
Yeah.
There was the history of women warriors, and then there was the DC mythology.
Right.
And then I think it's kind of your job to know all three of those and then to throw it all out because it's fiction and I can pick and choose whatever I want to make my points, right? So that's the end of that question. And then the question about the double page spread of the urns. So so for anybody who hasn't read the book,
shame on you. No, I'm just kidding.
It's all good.
They will if they haven't, that's for sure.
There you go. I hope so. I hope you enjoy it. It's very, very beautiful. It's an incredibly beautiful book. So it starts with the opening page is a tabula rasa, that script only, just text, no images, and because opening contracts are very important to me. And what this says to the audience is clean slate, forget everything that you know. And so that blank page says, the narrator addresses the reader and says, you think you know the history of the Amazons, but history is written by the victors, and in the war between the Amazons and the world of men, the Amazons lost. And so while there is no subjective or no objective history, theirs, this is ours. And so we're going to retell the story of the history of the Amazons from the perspective of the Amazons. And then kind of in a meta way, this is out of continuity for DC. So it also makes sense. Like DC's history is a different history. This is the Amazons' history. And that gives us a lot of freedom. Yeah. And so it begins with the goddesses going to the gods and saying, women are being treated unfairly. It's ridiculous. And you need to do something about it. And the vases that we're talking about, Phil and I refer to this as the indictment scene. And so they're making their case that the treatment of women in this world is beyond the pale. And so we were really wrestling with how to handle the violence, because it was really important to us to center the reader, the woman reader, in a meta way and in a literal way, because the conceit of the book is that it's a history of the Amazons written for a young Amazon. So this is for her to learn her history. Yeah. And so the narrator speaks directly to her. But we also wanted to center the female reader in a metatextual sense as well. And so so we didn't want the violence to be traumatizing, nor did we want it to be salacious or beautiful. And so we decided that the best way to do that was to make use of the comic form. And in these depictions of the violence, at the moment when the violence is at its peak moment, the woman's silhouette becomes a flat red silhouette. And what that does is it creates distance. So you can't form an emotional attachment to it. It's neither beautiful nor traumatizing. Yeah. And then Phil's brilliance is on that page turn. I had written, we talked about how to do this, and we talked about it as this was sort of the Amazons' library. This is their history, and all of their history is written on these vases, or not written, but portrayed on these vases. And so it was like, we'll do this double page spread. We'll have close-ups of, I think there's 8 of them, and then it may be 12. I don't remember. Yeah, anyway, and we'll turn the page. 10 or 12. Yeah. Yeah. we'll turn the page. And then I wrote on the script, like, as many as you would like to draw.
Right.
And then he drew what just looks like hundreds.
Yes, it's like, it feels like 3D, like you're floating in space through hundreds of them. Yeah.
And that was his intention. He wanted it to drop your jaw and make you think. It just continues forever. It continues throughout, as long as the history of man, which is the point we were trying to make. But boy, did he make it powerfully.
Oh, definitely. It's one of those pages that you go and then you're like, wait, let me go back and check that out again. And I've made the mistake of doing things digitally. I'm like, okay, this is clearly something I'm going to need to have like on my shelf. And I want the unpacking that you had when you had it in your Instagram and you did that whole, I'm like, I need to do that. But the cool thing about digital is that you can zoom in and just like absorb it all, and just kind of like you said, and as a reader, and Greg knows this about me. When I read his Kodiak books, I'm like, can you let me know if there's anything traumatic? Because I'm very sensitive to it. And so you're right. This is such a way to portray that trauma without being traumatized. And the brilliance of it is actually incredible, because now you saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is. And you go through it and you feel it, but then you're not like, it doesn't take you out of it, right? From what you're feeling. But yeah, it's really amazing.
So here, for anybody who's watching us on the YouTubes, I'm holding it up to the camera so you can see it.
Yeah.
That is the introductory page, and then this is that spread that just goes on forever.
It does.
Phil is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, not enough can really be said about like how visually stunning it is, because you can try to explain that. And like I said, I think you need to have both, like the hard copy, the digital. You need to have as many formats as is possible to really kind of capture that, because there's just so much going on.
In particular, in the binding of the physical copy, it's so beautiful to hold, but there are a couple of spreads. There's one spread of Hera in particular that you really do lose something in the physical binding.
Yeah, that's where I just queued up to. Yep. I can imagine.
She is right on
in the middle. Yeah. But this is why we need both. And so
there you go.
I think it's just one of those things. And, going back to that theme of, the beginning of it, and we have had enough of men, obviously there's that history of the treatment of women, like going through, like we see the visual thing, but I'm curious for you, you've always been very strong in your views. You've always been outspoken and just in your work through and through. But in particular, this one really felt, the impression was very strong. And I'm curious, like when you were conceiving this, or maybe when you were writing it, was there anything in particular that you were kind of channeling there? Or, because Greg and I always talk about, current events really do affect what's happening in our work or what's happening around me. Sometimes like you kind of outlet that way. Was there anything in particular that like really pushed the envelope with this, or is it really just something that's been accumulating over time?
Gosh, I can't think of anything in particular. But it's also, remember, it took 4 years to produce this book. So I don't know if I've said this publicly before, but I'm going to tread carefully here. When the first Wonder Woman film came out, it meant a lot to a lot of people. And I don't want to do anything to undermine or deride that. The woman I was sitting next to in the theater was in tears.
Yeah.
But I didn't have that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, I was very disappointed in the portrayal of the Amazons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I I think that's not sort of the answer that that question. I don't think it was anything sort of like political
Yeah.
or anything, but it didn't, just because it's women doesn't make it feminist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and there was a lot that I felt left me very hungry. And so I think there was just wanting to talk about them and their culture, um and then there was also, you know, listening to Elizabeth Vandiver's essays or lectures on Herodotus, um and going back through Homer, and just feeling how pushed to the side women are in these histories.
Yeah.
And um and their plot devices more than their characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got hungry for the way I've described it is I wanted a Homerian epic with a woman at the center.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we've set out to do here, is a Homerian epic with a woman at the center. And I think sometimes what people forget, and I think they forget this in comics more than they do in prose for some reason, is these I'm not speaking through the characters. Hera's not voicing my opinion. Like, I'm writing Hera as a different person than me, saying things I think she would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Hera says all of them, that's not me saying all of them, that's Hera saying all of them.
Right. Right.
And because I love that character doesn't mean I think she's right every time she speaks,
Mm-hmm.
and there's things are gonna get rough. I don't know how long it's been since people read Homer, but these are not tidy stories that end happily for these heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We refer to these as tragedies most often.
Right.
Well,
Greek
there's
tragedies
stories, and then there's but like I've read a lot of Martha Nussbaum's thinking about tragedy, and it's interesting. It resonates with me as an adult in a way that tragedies did not resonate with me as a young person, because I think, or maybe I could say, not just as an adult, but as a middle-aged adult, it means something different to me than it did as a young adult. As a young adult, I think I had this, like, I don't believe in the no-win situation, the Kobayashi Maru, no. There's a lot of times you have to make very difficult choices, and there isn't a right answer. And that's something I have been wrestling with quite a lot in my life. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the thing that, like, what is this? What was it that you were dealing with that speaks through this? And maybe it's what it is that everything is very complicated, and it's okay that it's very complicated, and there's beauty in that messiness and there's beauty in that pain. Um, so
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of that's the realism that we kind of get from that, because obviously we're reading a comic book, we're looking at
yeah,
these characters, it's this beautiful art. So I mean, we know that this isn't quote real life, but the themes, the words, the everything that's in there, it just really hits on so
yeah.
many levels. And gosh, there's so much to unpack there. I'm like, don't lose my train of thought. I've got so many
Oh, I'm
questions
so
for you.
sorry.
No, it's amazing. One was I want to talk about like those themes that you threw in there. But before I forget, one of the things I love to do on this podcast is talk with one of my friends about a book that we just love, and it's something that you read at different points in your life and it's kind of meaningful. And for us, that was like The Once and Future King, which is A Sword in the Stone. And as you read it through your life, there's just you get different things from it. And what you kind of just said really hit home with that. And I was
Yeah.
curious, as someone who has studied classical history and have been reading the epics and all the Greek tragedies, is there something that you would recommend, or that what is that one for you that you're like, you know what, just not just because of research, but you know what, in another 10 years, this is definitely one I want to take up again, because it might mean something different at the time, or I'll get different things from it. Is there like a great reread in your life? And it doesn't have to be classical history, but I don't know. Is there a book that's a great reread that you've kind of taken with you? Because clearly you're so well read, and I was just curious.
Yeah, it's not classical at all.
Yeah.
But probably the book that I reread the most is Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises,
Mm,
um, which I think most people would not predict
mhm.
if I had to guess how I'm perceived. Um, but I, I I love how it's a story that's told in such a clear and plain spoken way, and yet it's poetic and lyrical. Like it can be read aloud. It has a cadence and um, a melancholy. I Interestingly, like I don't like movies where I don't like where I don't have a character that I like, but I have difficulty with everyone in The Sun Also Rises. I think
Mm.
they're all of them complicated and self-pitying and arrogant and afraid, and like they're but they feel very real and very human to me.
Mm.
And so that's probably the book that I've read the most in my life, although it's been a while. But if I don't reread a book very often, but
Mhm.
I have reread The Sun Also Rises on multiple occasions.
All right. Fair enough. I will have to put it on my list now. I won't pretend to have read it.
There you go.
But this is why I ask these questions. And it's funny about you, Kelly Sue, is that you're like, yeah, I think people wouldn't guess this. And I'm like, I would never attempt to guess anything. I feel
Uh,
like you are just like what, you know, um,
well, because
I
I'm so
will guess that I know I'm going to like your writing, but I
uh,
wouldn't presume anything about you. Like I can empathize in a lot of ways, because I feel like there's a lot of preconceived notions about me, as well as who I am as Sifu Mimi Chan, right? And like you're Kelly Sue DeConnick, and people presume a lot in that, especially because you have public work where you've said a lot. And like you said, you're writing a character. It doesn't always mean like, I mean everything that this person is saying, and people automatically jump to your hero, right? Or like that's
right,
you're
right,
that person. And do you feel like people have trouble, or has that changed over the years? Have trouble seeing comics and graphic novels as literature versus, like you said, prose never gets like the same reputation. And obviously they're very different. And
Yeah.
but I mean, I have gotten so much out of graphic novels and comics that actually brought me to be a better reader. Like I wasn't really into reading, and that's really what helped kind of get me there.
Yeah.
And I see so much literature and so much like when I'm reading a lot of comics. So, but do you feel like that reputation has changed over time, or are we still?
I
And it isn't always literature, don't get me wrong, but
no,
there's
I think that, yes, I think there's a lot of yes to all of those things. I think there are a lot of misconceptions. I think that um, there has been a lot of progress. There's still stubborn ideas that, there are people who think that all comics are superhero comics. And there are people who think that all superhero comics are for children, or all superhero comics are salacious garbage, just toy selling power fantasies.
Mhm.
And none of those things are true. Comics are a medium, not a genre. Saying I don't like comics is like saying I don't like movies or I don't like music. Like, you probably do. I could probably find one that you would,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, but maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe you don't like to read books with pictures. Okay, that's fine. But
That's just stubborn.
yeah, I mean, but if that idea is based on this notion that, oh, what I maybe what you mean is you don't like Batman comics,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
even in that case, I could probably, there's a whole lot of Batman comics. I
Oh
bet I
yeah.
could find one you'd like,
Exactly. Yeah.
uh, uh, Batman, not my favorite character, but I bet, there are still Batman stories that I love. Right.
Yep.
And,
Yep. I'm in that same camp. I'm with you.
yeah. Uh, oh, and there is a Batman discourse right now. And I'm just like, taking everything that I have to just stay out of it. Just stay out of it.
Yeah,
No
better
good.
things to do. You have
No
more,
good will come of
yes,
it.
you have very little time, and we want you to
Yeah.
keep channeling your energy into this. And so, oh, I feel you. I feel you. Um, so I don't always really take like audience questions or anything like that, but everybody does know that Kelly Sue is hard to nail down because of your schedule and everything. And so some of our listeners, and I'm pretty choosy about it, but are curious about certain things. And I thought I would take
Sure.
the opportunity to ask, like, well, one is on a very technical note, like, what is the timeline for the continuation of Historia? Like, they just kind of were like, okay, we didn't even know this was coming out, and oh my God, all of a sudden all the comic book stores are sold out because like there was kind of like a timeline. There was a lot of
Yeah.
confusion for them. So people just want to know so they can be prepared, get their pre-orders on, or however it works. And
It's going to be roughly seasonally,
Mhm.
but that's roughly. So the next issue will be in April. And then the following issue, and I believe we actually have a release date for that. And that's with
Mhm.
Jean Ha, has written book
Oh,
2. Um,
love Jean.
and book 2 covers, um, book 1 is the creation of the Amazons. Book 2 is how did their numbers grow, right? How so in when they're created, there's only 30 Amazons.
Mhm.
So how come we have more Amazons than that?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's that's the arena of book 2. And then book 3 is the war between the gods and the Amazons. And Nicholas Scott is writing that one. And then there are 6 more that were in my pitch, but we're only approved for these 3. Okay, so we'll see whether or not we continue after that. But each is a 64-page issue. Each is produced slowly and deliberately, so that, you know, these artists are really showcasing, really taking advantage of that Black Label format, these oversized pages and rich productions, so that it does feel like a top shelf kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine how long it took to draw, like, just to do even one page of that. I mean, the detail and it's kind of mind blowing.
And that's all Phil, and you should have Phil on.
I should, yes, 100%.
Extraordinary human being, and I'd be delighted to make that introduction. One of my favorite people.
I would love.
And he just he took zero shortcuts, none. Sometimes he drew multiple outfits and then would send them to me and be like, which one do you think? And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
Like
wow.
There were multiple variations of Hera's sandals in that 2-page spread of Hera. And it like, they're all beautiful sandals, Phil.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I need like him as my personal shopper choice. Like what style? What style?
You know, and it's really interesting because I've learned so much about like queer theory working with him, which is, it's like I'm my voice gets a little trepidatious as I mention this, because as a straight white cisgendered woman, I'm like, oh, out of my depth here, you know. Right. But we were talking about there being something about the aesthetic of this that's like grand and glamorous and very gay, like this very sort of loud and proud, and it's interesting that I think that the way I'm able to viscerally connect to that from my own lived experience is, and you and I met in person once, and I recall you're a bit taller than I am, but you're not a giant.
No.
And I don't know if you have this, I'm 5 feet tall. And now you also come from a tradition of martial arts, so there's a very different, but as a small person, I have kind of throughout my life been treated as an ornament or a child, or people will just pick me up, and very almost always with affection, you know.
Intention is one thing, but it still doesn't mean it's right.
But and there you
get patted on your head and
but so there is a like, and you see this in nature too. You like I take my dogs to the dog park, right? And I have like that Padfoot is 100 pounds.
Yes.
And
like a pony. Matt said I could take a ride on him when I come out there.
Yes.
Because, pretty much.
But Padfoot gets bossed around by the little rat terriers. And I think I identify with that little rat terrier. There's this like I'm big, see me, you know, I'm gonna take up space, you know. And I think that there's like something, there's some kind of like, no, you will not disappear me, you will not diminish me, I will be grand and present and flamboyant, you know. And I think in like the history of the gay movement, I think that has so much to do with like having to protect themselves by disappearing and blending in, right? And so then to come out was to like, I will not hide. In fact, I will be very present. I will be unignorable. And I think that my experience, the experience of that I'm able to connect to viscerally comes from being a small person. And like, you know, so like I'm 51 years old and I have worn my hair crayon red for probably more than half my life now. Like that's why you do that. You know what like what's going on there, you know?
I just can't even imagine it any other way. So although you know, it was a Tallulah or it was sporting it like the half. So I was like, oh, you know, that I can see you with that maybe.
Well, at some point I'm gonna have to like let it. I'm getting salt and pepper up here.
I feel you.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe my version of going gray will be going pink.
Right. There you go. That's a good compromise. I love it. And just kind of like one of our last questions, which actually kind of goes into one of my questions, which was kind of about the themes and everything. It's like, how do you work with readers' bias against new material, especially with a character that's already established? And I think you kind of touched on this, but it also kind of plays into something that I wanted to bring up, and you can kind of meld in the answer if you like, which is, there are so many themes that I pull out of this as I read, with obviously, you know, women empowerment, the mistreatment, the abuse. And then from that, we know who Wonder Woman eventually becomes and how she channels that. And even though you go through trauma and challenges, like it doesn't make you a damaged individual who can't succeed, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's just political themes. There's so many themes. Like, is all of that overly intentional, or do you put things in there and go, okay, reader, you kind of decide, or you know, you interpret, or are there very intentional things throughout this?
Well, I mean, both. So once the book is out in the world, it no longer belongs to me. I can tell you what my intention was,
right,
but that does not invalidate what you get from the reading. Your relationship to the reading is yours. That material exists as something separate from me and separate from Phil. You have a relationship to the work that is not your relationship to either of us. If you're interested in my perspective or my intention, I'm happy to share it with you, usually. But it's not, I really do believe in separating the art and the artist. And I think the work has to be evaluated as something that stands alone. If you have to stand there and explain it or clarify, then I think that maybe something's wrong. That said, I also don't believe like that's rather the point that I'm working with, right? Is ambiguity and messiness and complexity. So if some of these things are not crystal clear, maybe it's because they're not crystal clear. You know, you know, I have this conversation with my children a lot, because my kids, my son in particular, really likes to, he follows the news and he wants to know if someone's are they a good guy or a bad guy, right? Like, people aren't good or bad. People are people. They do good things and they do bad things.
Mhm.
Most people intend to do good, but their perception of doing good may not be what I perceive to be good, right?
Mhm.
So there are very few people in the world who are genuine mustache twirling villains who want to cause pain. Those
Mhm.
people do exist, but I
In
would still,
Florida. No, I'm just kidding.
my mom was there. But I would still say that for a great deal of those people, probably most of those people, that aggression, that need to control other people, that need to take from other people, comes from a place of intense fear and injury. When I am my best self, I can say of those people, you know, I hope that you can find peace. Now, I still need you to find peace over there where you can't hurt anyone.
Mhm. Mhm.
But, that doesn't mean we don't protect one another. That doesn't mean that we don't stop people from hurting, in particular, people who are not in a position to be able to protect themselves.
Right.
But I have a very hard time with this language of heroes and villains. And so I think that I've lost my way in this question a bit.
No, we're good. This is
Okay.
the nature of my podcast.
All right. But,
I just like hearing you talk, so keep on
all
it.
right.
You're good.
But yeah, there's
Yeah,
a
it's not black and white, right? It's
no,
just not. And that's just like kind of the world we're living in, and
and
that's
yeah,
interpretation.
we want to be doing good, to be putting love into the world, to be protecting ourselves and our communities, and even beyond protecting, fostering, right? Like
Mhm.
protecting is this defensive position. I'd like to be able to get past a defensive position into a proactive, nurturing, fostering
Mhm.
position. But I don't think we can do that when we sort people into good and bad. And that doesn't mean that there aren't people who do way more bad than they do good.
Right.
People, I tell my kids, like, you don't have to like everybody. It's okay.
Right.
Like, I want you to try to engender compassion for everyone, but you don't have to like everybody.
Right, right, right.
You don't even have to like all the other kids. I'm not going to tell, like, maybe there
Yeah.
aren't good people and bad people, but there certainly are assholes.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and the sooner they figure that out and learn that and then not feel bad about it and like, well, I don't really like this
Oh,
person. They're just mean all the time. Yeah, well then don't, I think it's better. I can't imagine having a parent in just since the last time we spoke to even now, it's like back then when we spoke, we were just dealing with we're coming off of the election, we're coming off of all these things, it's been a year or whatever, and then now we're coming out of what hopefully is towards the end of this pandemic and things being kind of the new normal, because I don't think there is a normal anymore. I think it's whatever we kind of create that to be. And like I said, I've been fortunate to have touched base with Matt throughout this, and he's let me know how you all are doing. But I mean, how are you doing, Kelly Sue? Like, how are you, and what do you get get to do for yourself to unwind, to relax, to kind of come down, because it's just been a lot. You know, and
Yeah.
even having to have these conversations with your kids, right? It's a lot because there's just so much there.
Yeah. I've made some mistakes in the pandemic. In particular, I always take on too much. I have taken on obscenely too much.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, you know, Matt will be like, you have to just quit. You have to like let that go. And I'm like, no, I'm obligated to that. I just have to like get through it.
Gotta finish it. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel you.
And like intellectually, I know how stupid that is, but I don't know if it's pride or stubbornness or fear. Probably, usually fear is to blame for most dumb stuff, right? But whatever it is, I've gotten myself overbooked. The things I enjoy, though, I do make time, and I think it's been since December, though. So it's been a while, but I sew, which I quite enjoy.
Yeah.
And I like crafting. I like handwork, sewing, and I did a beaded portrait of Endora from Bewitched, who's like one of my favorite characters. And you know, I used to, pre-pandemic, you and I talked about this, I think, but I was supposed to test for my Taekwondo black belt in November of 2020.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's ever going to happen. And in fact, I have my sparring gear is in the hallway outside of my office, because I think I'm just ready to donate it. I know.
Well, but you can take all of that with you, all that you've learned, and you know,
Yes.
and you can do all the basics and stuff. Maybe you're not going to be doing the, you know, all the
Yeah.
other technical things and the sparring and all of that, but you can just spar with Matt and the kids.
There you go. You know, I was thinking the other day actually about like that I might really enjoy going through the forms.
Yeah.
But the most important lessons that I got from Taekwondo were not the physical ones.
Of course. Yeah.
And that probably has as much to do with why, you know, my schedule is the largest reason why, even though, you know, the dojang's opened up again, I'm like, when would I go? You know, but my Master Hong, who was the master that we studied with for the bulk of our journey, and it was all four of us at one point, but it fell down to just T and I. So T and I got to black stripe, so we were one belt away from our just the initial black belt, which is like, a lot of people think like black belt is like, ooh, you know, you're a black belt, and like that's basic competency, you guys. Master Hong was like a 7th degree black belt.
Right.
Okay, now that is superhero stuff, right? This was like, no, you speak the language of
you starting your journey.
Yes, exactly. But and she continued to go because it was something that she and I did together. But think it was really meaningful to me, and it was meaningful to me in particular because of Master Hong, and because of what he modeled for me, which was and I will almost get teary talking about him, but this man had a gentle grace and a calm authority. He never raised his voice. He was never unkind. He was never sharp. And he would work with a room full of children from, like, I think 6, and then, students in our 50s, and he was able to give everyone what they needed in a way that didn't undermine the group. Like, it was just, in the way that he would it was most poignant to me as a parent, the way he would work with the small children, that he would never embarrass them, he would never frighten them, but he engendered respect, not fear. And so, when Master Hong would stop and wait for you to collect yourself, you collected yourself.
Yes, I know.
And then also just like the things that, he talked at one point about, like, why we don't have pockets in our uniform, right? And he said, because you don't hide your weapons, right? And then but the other things he was like, and so our hands are our weapons, and we can use our weapons in these, and he was like, you can, like, the spear or the chop or fist, or like, and going through all these things, and he says, but what's the most important thing that you can do with your hands? And he says, and he reaches down and he pulls his friend up, like one of the classmates up, says, this is the most important thing that you can do with your hands. And then this, and he's like, so we don't put them away because they always have work to do. And it was just like, and through broken English and a very strong accent, crystal clear. Just crystal clear. And anyway, I'm writing an ode to Master Hong, but he was, like, really important to me. And he moved away just before the pandemic. If anyone listening to this is in Bothell, Washington, just outside of Seattle, look for his dojang, because he is just a phenomenal teacher, and also a phenomenal martial artist. Like, he flies. He does things that gravity should not permit. And he's so, just that gentle authority was like, oh, I'll never be that person, but I would like to take those lessons into I'm like, but I want to remember the important things to do with my hands. I want to remember that I don't want people to fear me. I want them to respect me, that kindness should come first, right? That when I take care of myself, I am making sure that I can take care of others, right? Like that, all of that but so when he left, we had another master come in, who was a younger man and lovely, but I just didn't have the same connection.
Yeah. And that's a very special thing. And I am telling you, you're telling me you get teary. I get teary. Just hearing that someone is taking such good care of you, that you had that kind of instructor, because it is really rare. And especially like in this modern world we live in, to find that tradition and to find someone who is such a great leader and teacher. And so I'm so happy that you had that experience in your martial journey. That's amazing.
It was just incredible. And like, and you know, you hear him talking about, he would tell stories about his training, and you know, and some of the training that like he did, I was like, that's child abuse, you know.
Yeah. Pretty much. I got it.
Like, you know, but he tells us stories with a sense of humor about it. And but you know, he talked about that they would go into horse pose, and his trainer would put balled up socks on his legs, and if the socks fell off, he'd get hit with a stick.
Yeah. I understand. My students listening now are going, well, that tracks. And you know what's interesting is there is a tradition to that, right? So there is a tradition to what we now in modern times would be like, that sounds like child abuse. But I mean, it's kind of like how we learn through the times, and this can be said through writing as well, right? Like it was okay to use these words at a certain period of time because we didn't know, we didn't have like the science, the knowledge, the you know, the wokeness, whatever, right? It's just, and we can't always, you know, we can't judge people from history with the time, with the lessons of today. So it's an interesting thing. But
and look, his training, he clearly came from a family and a tradition that loved him and cherished him.
Right.
They made a wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that's why he's the teacher he is. Absolutely. And you know, you learn from that. But I'm so like warmed by the fact that you had this amazing experience, because I usually hear like the opposite experience, like, oh, I went to this thing and I don't like martial arts. And so the fact that you had that, and you're a true martial artist, like you've taken from it exactly what the philosophy of it is. And I think that's really amazing. So
he is an absolutely extraordinary teacher of personhood, you know. And I think that's really what you're going to learn there. You know. And when I was talking to my son about it, about why I wanted him to come with me, it was, you know, I was like, I'm not trying to teach you how to fight. I'm trying to teach you how to carry yourself so that you never get in a fight. You know, and how to navigate the world without violence. It was just, if anybody lives near Bothell, Washington.
I'll link that. We'll look it up, and I'll link it here for them.
You terribly. I'll totally look it up.
Kelly Sue's got a huge endorsement here. And I mean, I don't want to take up too much more of your time and everything, but I mean, I've learned so much. Every conversation I have, I'm so fortunate, but just kind of hearing you kind of come full circle with that, with all of that knowledge, like it clearly shows through your work. And I know I'm getting like real meta out there with it, but I truly believe, like, obviously in martial arts training and everything, and like the discipline that you have, and all to get the things done. But I will say, you know, as your therapist online, is that, you know, take care of yourself and allow yourself some rest, and know that that's part of the work as well. Cause I'm totally not practicing what I preach here. I'm the same. We're cut from the same cloth, where it's like, no, I can get it done. I committed to this. I believe in it. I want to do it. You know, I've taken on a ton of things through this pandemic that I definitely should not have, and they're great, worthy causes, but it doesn't mean that it's a good cause for me. Right. And so, please be kind to yourself and practice good self-care, and
Right,
And
yeah,
I know, and allow all the lovely people in your life to take care of you too, because I know that they do and they adore you. So, so with that, do we want to, we'll post it here. Obviously the second story
yes.
of Historia will be coming out, and I'll link that, of course, because by the time this releases, it'll be pretty soon, and that'll be
Yeah.
exciting. So yeah.
I think it's April 5th. I'm not
Mhm.
100% sure of that, but I believe it is April 5th. That's book 2. And then book 3 is in the fall. So we don't have an exact release date for that yet.
Well, that's fine, because you and I will be talking late April anyway, so you can
There
give me
we
an
go.
update then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as always, it's a delight and a pleasure and just an honor to talk to you. So, Kelly Sue, everybody.
Thanks, you guys.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.